Have you ever looked into the sky and pondered the inky depths of space? Vast as this sea, ever moving, uncaring, inhospitable, and utterly beyond our own capability of understanding. Yet we sail into this great unknown, regardless of our own inadequacies, forging a greater understanding of ourselves and our place in this turbulent ocean. But for every triumph, every marvelous feat of engineering, every discovery, we begin to understand less and less. The ironclad laws of the cosmos we spent thousands of years documenting and refining begin to warp, bend, and break as we desperately try to grasp the sand tumbling through the hourglass as the stars stare blankly back at us. Their ghost-like caresses us, beckoning as sirens to our own doom. Reach us, if you dare. Meanwhile, we still understand little of our own vessel hurtling through the dark. Supremacy was never gained, but we did at last find our footing. But what lies below us and in the waters remains largely a mystery. We stand on a knife's edge between utter destruction and the flame of humanity simply fading into obscurity. All the while, our silent companion, our own moon, observes. But this silence was never meant to be eternal. Today we are discussing the incomprehensible horror of Local 58. Hi folks, you can call me Norman. Welcome in, as today we will be discussing the hit analog horror series Local 58, a short series that takes the guise of a local broadcast station with some rather horrifying early morning segments involving everything from government propaganda to some stargazing with a twist. Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, nor do I have an established critical analysis channel like Matpat, Nexpo, or Wendigoon, but I do have this telescope. And I read every item description in Elden Ring before ever watching a VatiVidya video. Try to say that 3 times fast. It is currently October, and it's coming fast to the end of October, and I thought it would be fun to make a video on what is one of my most favorite analog horror series, which is funny because it's kind of the one that gave it its namesake. And I personally think it best encapsulates what analog horror is and can be. For any of you watching that may not know what analog horror is, and yes, for those who already know what it is, there are indeed people out there who have no idea. Essentially, it's a genre of horror utilizing older analog technology. Things like VHS, Betamax, cassette tapes, film reels, that sort of stuff to create an audio-video aesthetic. Usually it's in a home movies or found footage format, or maybe it's like a corrupted piece of media that was never meant to be found. Think if you found a demon-possessed VHS tape of Thomas the Tank Engine and what that might look like, or the Blair Witch Project, and you pretty much have a good idea on what it is. Now, I don't want to belittle what other people have worked hard on or what they like, but a lot of analog horror seems to boil down to just these spooky faces that have been stretched to hell and back in Photoshop. And it seems like nuance and pacing have been kind of shot dead in the backyard, and it's less of a cohesive vision of ideas that lead to a horrible reveal that tears at your fears, and more of a, ooh, wasn't that spooky and or disturbing? For some series, it goes so far into ridiculousness that it actually becomes endearing and enjoyable for totally different reasons than being scary. Local 58, however, doesn't suffer from this, I feel. The series delivers a tight, cohesive experience that finds a way to get under your skin and asks the who, what, when, where, why questions. And it also really fully embraces that medium of analog technology, and other than just being like a VHS overlay. And it does interesting things with them to both use scares, and it creates this universe worth paying attention to. The variety of the series is also pretty impressive. It doesn't rely on any gimmick other than it being like a local broadcast station to keep things spooky, but rather has these themes that sort of permeate throughout the series. So I'm going to quit singing its praises and just get on with it. But I'm going to do an overview of the series in order of release, then establish what I believe to be the timeline of events, and an analysis of each part, including the ARG elements. Then put together the story so far and where I believe it might be going. Some of this comes down to new information that's come out since they've last talked about it, or new episodes. And some, it's about these details that I see absolutely no one online talking about, and it's got me screaming internally. So this part is why I decided that I wanted to make this video, just to kind of get this out there, because I really want to know how close I am. But to know that is to know the creator of Local 58, Chris Straub, and I do not know him, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that maybe this video finds its way to him. Also, spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't watched it. If you just watch the primary videos on YouTube, it's only around 20 minutes or so, and I think it's very worth it. I think even disregarding the live stream and the ARG portion of Local 58, it gives you a great product that's totally worth your time, especially if you're into spooky internet video stuff. So definitely give it a watch. Also, I can already tell that this video is going to be really long, so I'm going to include timestamps in the video somewhere. So if you want to skip to the analysis and theories portion of the video, you're more than welcome to do that, especially if you've already watched it. Chris Straub, also, if you are watching this, hi. Feel free to do that unless you want to see me gush about your video series or anything like that. So, cool. Let's kind of dive in. To some of you, it may seem like I'm looking at the videos out of their posting order on YouTube, but Season 1 of Local 58 was actually posted on a now defunct website, local58.info, or kind of defunct. We'll get into that later. YouTube didn't actually become the de facto place for Local 58 until several years later, and the viewing order is a little different, but I want to cover it as it was being produced. The first video is called Weather Service, and starts with a very familiar looking local channel aesthetic, or familiar if you're over the age of 30, with the time slots for what seems to be some low budget shows and paid programming, with the last time slot titled Focus on Faith. It's funny because I want to start breaking down theories on literally for the first frame of this dang series. My tinfoil hat mind is just going a bit wild, but we'll have to save all that for the analysis. The video then makes a quick shift to an emergency alert with a weather warning of a meteorological event, and we are advised not to look at it with the naked eye. Things then shift back to what looks like a revised time slot for 2:15 that is titled Blood of the, before the transmission is interrupted again. That's not ominous at all. The new weather warning is upgraded to a civil alert, and we are warned not to look at the night sky. The screen then glitches and the warning is lifted and states that the event is safe to view and to go outside now. Kinda weird for an emergency broadcast, if you ask me. The broadcast then seems to totally break down and become extremely distorted, with someone telling us directly that we shouldn't look at the moon, stay inside, and avoid windows and mirrors before returning to an eerily silent image of the station's logo. We then receive a final ominous weather warning with a rather poetic sounding message. It's in the light. The moon came in. He found me. Through the mirror. Moonlight white. White like eyes. Not light, but blood. I drown in him. If you are afraid, we will look together. Before revealing the last shot of the broadcast. This to me is 2 minutes and 33 seconds of absolute brilliance. It plays on this nostalgic familiarity and deepens the terror of a typical EAS alert. Those alerts are natural jump scares in their own right, but one that is telling you to not look at the moon? Like, what's wrong with the moon? And why can't I look at it? I would have this natural just curiosity to want to look at it just so I could figure out what was going on. And that last part of the broadcast with something that sounds straight out of the Book of Revelations and the shot of the moon with screaming in the background, that's so creepy. This also establishes what becomes one of our core themes of Local 58. What is wrong with the moon? Up next is the video titled Contingency. This one, much like the episode Weather Service, starts with a broadcast of the time slot, but there are a few things different. One, the video character is much different. The grain of the video, color choice, and audio all indicate that this particular broadcast was recorded much earlier than Weather Service, by what seems to be like a few decades. This is also reinforced by the broadcast stating that it is the end of the broadcast day. Now, we live in an era of constant stream-on-demand video services, and even before that, 24-hour television was the norm. But in the early days of broadcast television, this wasn't the case. But we'll come back to that later when we talk about the timeline of the series. As it continues, the broadcast is interrupted and we are shown a title card for the reel to only be shown in the event of a complete surrender of the United States, and ask the viewer to comply with the instructions of the video. It then begins to show a very flowery and patriotic message from the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, lamenting this surrender, but calling on U.S. citizens to act, now as he has already taken action to preserve the dignity of the U.S. The video goes on to ask the viewer to take the final and greatest liberty of all, and to use whatever means available to them. What is this final liberty, you ask? Well, it suggests a firearm is ideal and that it should be placed. I think you get the idea. Join your neighbors, your family, your God. Thank you. The thank you. That seems so sinister to me. But yeah, no thank you. The video goes on to say that local law enforcement has been ordered to ensure compliance and that this message will repeat until there are none left to hear it. You can either do this the easy, dignified way or the hard way, I guess. It then goes on to describe the most ideal way to take action if time allows, and to remember the 3 F's: front lawn, face up, feet together. This will be something we look at later. It then continues to remind you of your infants and pets and not to leave them out, and make sure to use a calm demeanor when taking care of their liberties, calling them the smallest patriots. The broadcast then has a glitch with a slide stating the 51st state is not a place. After this, the regular broadcast seems to return, saying that the station is having technical difficulties while issuing a correction to the previous broadcast saying that it was all just a big hoax. What a relief. Hopefully everyone saw that, right? But hidden in the background and shown clearly for just a few frames is a hoax apology card before the video ends. This, of course, has a lot of implications, but we will get onto that later. As of time of recording now, Contingency has 4.6 million views, making it the most single popular video Local 58 has, by almost like 1 million views. It's not hard to see why, though, because asking for an entire country to commit mass seppuku to maintain national dignity is horrifying. The garbled national anthem in the background just adds to the sinister request. The next video starts with the familiar Local 58 logo, as we've seen in Weather Service, but the program cuts quickly to dashcam footage of a car driving in the rain, with a GPS heard in the background guiding our driver to an unknown location. The video then begins to transition from out of a city to what looks like a curvy county highway, and then to a dirt road in poor condition where the GPS indicates that they are close to their destination and that the driver should turn off their headlights. After a few seconds of darkness, an unnatural roar breaks the silence. Now our unnamed driver begins to book it out of there fast, while the GPS begins to comment that they should make a U-turn and that their destination is quickly coming up from behind them. It's not typically how it works. The video ends with the car turned over and on fire with another roar heard in the distance. Admittedly, there's little to really talk about details-wise with this one, but oh man, is it an experience. The unsettling long drive that gets more rural as time goes on, and the building of tension with complete darkness just outside of the headlight beams is just so perfect. Also, it's unsettling that a GPS would recommend a route on a dirt road, and that's kind of the first sign something weird is going on. And by the first time you really start thinking about it, the GPS asks the driver to turn off the headlights. Absolutely wild. And the culmination of the chase and the GPS telling the driver that its destination is quickly coming up from behind is just terrifying. Also, the monster is only seen for just a brief frame, which is kind of how I like things to be done. I don't really like when stuff shows their monster for too much, or they're on screen too much. It's nice to let your imagination kind of run wild with what they're doing when you can't see them. This episode also reminds me of a kind of a personal story, and I'm not sure if this is anything that may have happened to some of you before, but in some really rural areas, public dirt or gravel roads still exist. I actually grew up on a road that was gravel until I became a teenager, but I used to work as a contract bidder for a home repair business, and sometimes I would have to go out to this area in Tennessee called the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL is what we called it. It's beautiful, and it's so rural that from the eastward side, the quickest way to get there is via a ferry. When is the last time you ever rode on a ferry with your car? But one time, while going out to put in a bid for some work on a lakeside home, the GPS started taking me onto a dirt road. And eventually it came to the spot where the GPS was asking me to drive into the river. Needless to say, I was a bit mortified, and I had no cell phone service, so when I tried to put in a new address, it was like, sorry, you're out of luck. So I was lost, but eventually I was able to find my way to town, and I was able to get some directions, and finally was able to make it to the appointment. Funny thing is when I showed up, the guy wasn't even there, and he called and he was like, yeah, I'm not coming. Go figure. Well, anyways, these 3 episodes comprise what is essentially season 1 for Local 58. So far, we've got a weird moon, spooky government mandate, hoax things, and now a monster. But so far, none of it is connected yet. After the conclusion of season 1, we get an episode called Station ID. Now, on the surface, this video serves mostly like a channel trailer for anyone popping onto the YouTube channel to have a look-see, but it does share some interesting information in the typical broadcast format we've grown accustomed to. Analog horror at 476 megahertz. We begin our broadcast day. Look away. It does not matter. There are other receivers. Safety in numbers. Some of this we'll talk about later in the analysis, but I believe 476 megahertz is related to our own methods of current data distribution, or it's how data used to be distributed in broadcast format, and to basically state this is how you view Local 58. It's 476 megahertz. I think this is also the origin for the term analog horror, so I think this is what gave analog horror its namesake. Analog horror technically existed before Local 58 and all the other ones we see on YouTube, with things like the Blair Witch Project or the radio dramatization of Orson Welles, the War of the Worlds. Goodness, I can't talk today. Which was a broadcast way back, I think, in 1938. Which, if you don't know, it's pretty interesting. The broadcast was given this breaking news kind of aesthetic, and some of the listeners actually believed that Martian invaders were attacking the Earth. That's actually a topic I think I want to cover sometime in the future in more detail. But either way, this term analog horror was termed by Local 58, and it stuck. Up next, we have the episode Show for Children. And spoilers, it's definitely not a show for children. From the jump, we can tell, much like the episode Contingency, the aesthetic has changed, indicating a different time period for the broadcast. As the broadcast begins, we are treated to an old black and white cartoon reminiscent of something like Disney's Steamboat Willie, with our protagonist Cadaver, a lovable-looking French skeleton, walking around in a graveyard looking for love, with a smiling moon watching over him. Which sounds weird to say, but I guess if you're an animated skeleton, that checks out. It's not necrophilia if you're already dead. When Cadaver comes to his first grave and peers inside, all he finds is a horrible-looking skeleton, complete with a horrified expression with his eyes still intact. The stark contrast between this skeleton and the adorable nature of Cadaver is really unsettling. And Cadaver agrees because he gets out of there fast. Cadaver is naturally a little on edge now and comes to his second grave, but this time we are instead greeted with whatever this monstrosity is. Again, Cadaver gets scared and runs off. The whole mood has now changed, with our fun orchestral background absent, replaced by a howling wind, as the moon's expression has changed from a cheery smile to a contemptuous grin. When Cadaver reaches his third grave, it reveals a long dark tunnel that takes him into a cavern where he finds a fourth and final grave. Cadaver then lowers himself into the grave, lying face up with a worried expression, staring at the grave opening as the moon begins to hover over, but when the camera cuts back to Cadaver, all we find are a pile of bones. This episode is great, and it serves that variety that Local 58 brings. It starts cute and joyful and just slowly descends into darkness and madness while continuing our theme of there's something wrong with the moon. The next episode, A Look Back, is somewhat like the episode Station ID and serves more as a trailer than like a fully fledged episode. But even in a trailer, we get some pretty useful stuff. The episode begins with a montage of Local 58's logos and channel aesthetics from over the decades, which definitely helps in piecing together the timeline later, and even includes logos not even seen in the current lineup of episodes to date. As per the norm, the broadcast experiences an interruption, and a simple text message is delivered. We send signals to ourselves through their domain. Did we really believe they wouldn't add their own? Following this, we get clips from episodes prior, including Show for Children, You Are on the Fastest Available Route, Contingency, and some other shows we haven't seen yet, such as a show titled Still Life, Public Eye, and a clip from what looks to be an old black and white movie. While this serves as a great trailer, it also is the first video from the series that gives the implication that these are connected events and not just a horror anthology. Alright, so now it's time to cover the episode Real Sleep, one heavy hitter of an episode. The horror is obviously great in this one, but this is truly where the rabbit hole begins. The episode immediately jumps into a personalized video for a person named Philip Gerhardt, our first character in the series, unless you count Cadaver, but it's produced by a company called the Thought Research Initiative. It then begins to tell us some sleep facts about how dreaming isn't necessary for sleep, but that REM sleep is good for your well-being, and that precognition is a lie, and anything you might dream about is just a biochemical waste product. So, don't pay attention to that silly stuff. But 8 hours of sleep is good, so make sure you do that. The next section of the video goes into what they call the Kleitman map. It details that through their research, they have been able to map out the signaling process of dreams and how to disable them. Little known fact, but Nathaniel Kleitman is a real person who is considered the pioneer of sleep science. But we'll get into all that later in the analysis. The next section, Inducing Your Anti-Dream, is where the episode goes from weird to terrifying real quick. Also, just as a disclaimer, this section utilizes a real psychological mind trick. I don't have any issues after watching it, other than, the effect it produces while you watch it, but apparently it can trigger nightmares, so if you're prone to that, maybe skip ahead. This section reiterates that this is a personalized video before it starts, and I think I'm just going to play a portion of the video rather than try to narrate it play by play so you can get the effect.
There are no faces. 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 There are no faces.
Oh boy, wasn't that fun? There's a lot to break down here. For a start, faces are one of those things we as humans really pay attention to. Psychologically, we're attracted to them because a face can communicate a lot. That's why you see so many like these thumbnails on YouTube include someone's face because it's displaying some type of emotion. Fear, sadness, joy, hate, anger, all these things a face can naturally communicate without us even realizing it. And the section rapidly flashing these sinister messages across the screen, we can pick up on these too subliminally as well, but even if we can't remember it at the end of the video. This whole section I just really like. Utilizing a psychological phenomenon to induce a very natural fear that portrays our psychology is just diabolical and fun. The video then ends with a message telling the viewer to contact a technician if they experience any ill side effects and to not see a doctor. Cool. Also, before we move on, I just wanted to share another fun personal tidbit. But for several years, I used to sell mattresses for a living. Now, I hated being that classic car salesman type of stereotype. So what I did is I did a lot of research on the effects of sleep, and I used that to communicate things to people to try and help fit them into a mattress that best fit their own personal needs and their budget. So I just tried to be knowledgeable for people rather than trying to push them into something that maybe they didn't want or felt pushed to. But like the video we just watched, everyone sleeps a little different and has different needs, and their bodies are different, their minds are different. But what's interesting, while I worked there and in all my kind of research I did on my own, it's actually surprising how little we actually understand about why humans sleep. We do know that, in general, for most people, 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep helps things like memory allocation, muscle tissue repair, hormonal balance, and it can be really helpful for things like maybe general depression. Note, that's general depression. If you're a normal person and feel tired and sad a lot, then sleeping more could probably help. But don't take that as medical advice, because if you actually suffer from clinical depression, then it's best to see a doctor. Anyways, what's really interesting is REM sleep, or rapid eye movement. Now, for most of you, you probably think, when you sleep, you're just asleep. There's nothing more to it. But you actually go up and down through these different cycles of sleep, including REM sleep. And during REM, the reason why they call it rapid eye movement is because your eyes just start twitching all around. It's really interesting to watch. I'm sure you probably saw one of your friends or spouse or something like that, when they're asleep and they start, their eyes kind of are moving back and forth behind their eyelids. It's kind of creepy looking, but this is where you begin to dream. The fun part is we have absolutely no idea, biologically speaking, what the purpose of dreaming actually does. And I'm just going to leave it there and move on to the next episode. Next episode is Skywatching. Skywatching starts by shaking up the timeline once again with a new logo, or a new logo in a mainline episode, as we actually saw this logo displayed in the episode A Look Back. But we were shown a time slot for Skywatching, a city council meeting, and paid programming. As Skywatching is about to begin, the broadcast is hijacked once again with what looks like a home movie of the same name. Things are fairly normal, showing us things like Orion's Belt and Pleiades, but when the camera focuses on the moon, it's titled His Throne, and cuts to several up-close shots revealing the moon to be scattered with what appears to be a biological membrane of some sort, with lunar dust flowing freely into craters, almost as if the moon is breathing. We then get a panning shot of what looks like some type of moon base connected via a canal to a large triangle. It almost gives the impression of a giant pointing arrow. The moon then disappears as the camera zooms out to refocus, only for the moon to reappear closer than before with sirens blaring in the background and some giant monster nestled inside the moon. The cameraman then walks out in front of the camera, falling to his knees with the words "Rejoice" flashing to the screen. So this is the third time the moon has been involved with Local 58, cementing that something is really wrong here. The reveal of the moon being subtitled "His Throne" just sent shivers down my spine. The moon as a throne is so far removed from our own perception of what a throne is that, especially if you just consider it conceptually, even just beyond the literal astronomical size of it, it's so good. But we're in the home stretch for the series to date, so we got one more mainline video and then an archived live stream to go for the overview. The episode Digital Transition opens with the end of a black and white movie before we see a brand new logo and a message from the broadcast station that, in accordance with FCG regulations, Local 58 will be making the switch from analog to digital tonight at midnight, and that anyone with an analog TV may qualify for a free digital conversion kit. There is also a phone number. Let's just call that really quick. That's such a nice touch. I don't know why, but it gives me goosebumps. The website is also notable, but we'll get into that later when we talk about the ARG rabbit hole, because that's where it kind of starts. The video continues with another timeline showcasing Local 58's evolution over the years, like in the episode A Look Back. How thoughtful of Mr. Stroud to give us, more information on creating a timeline. 2 timeline pieces, so generous. But we see the familiar logos and characters like Cadaver in full color, ending with the new logo shepherding in the digital age for Local 58. As the clock strikes midnight, the broadcast begins to break down, and we see an older logo appear with an announcement that the station will not be participating in the digital conversion, followed by the new logo appearing on screen saying that your TV hasn't been configured for digital reception. In the background, you can see that the header changes from announcement to betrayal and saying, "I, the one you watched, I, the always here. They make you thought from pieces. They cut the thoughts I am. All knife, all knife. Thoughts shape in needles. They dream themselves in knives." Before a new screen saying to go outside now comes up. The broadcast then completely breaks down, losing all clarity before a series of messages begin to appear on screen. Unthinking, they move to cut his throat, only to make 1,000 mouths. If he is silenced, we will speak for him. Signs and wonders flood our little sky. No stars above us, only eyes waiting to open. There are other receivers. Afterwards, a warning is displayed from the FCG saying that unauthorized analog reception is punishable by federal law with up to 10 years of prison and a $150,000 fine. In real life, while I don't think it's illegal to necessarily receive analog signals, everything that is broadcasted since 2009, I think, needs to be broadcast digitally. And there's a lot, obviously, to talk about this one, but we will come back to that because there is a lot going on here. The final up-to-date entry, Close, was actually a live stream when it was first uploaded, which I think is really cool, considering that Local 58 has used so many methods of storytelling, from these old archive broadcasts to websites, phones, and now live stream. The video is unlisted, but it's actually archived and can be found by just looking in the playlist tab on Local 58's YouTube channel. This is also the longest video so far, clocking in at 29 minutes and 43 seconds. As the live stream begins, it states that it is being produced by the fictional space agency SARO, or SARO, or the Space and Aeronautics Regulatory Oversight, which seems to be a play on the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or, NASA. And CLOSE stands for Cometary Lander Orbiter Survey Expedition, and the mission is to a fictional comet called 57383 Eidolon. As the live stream begins in earnest, we can see the comet coming into view in the distance, and as it continues, we receive information on the comet's trajectory, 3D modeling, and amateur photographs. Because of the unique shape of Eidolon, it is given the nickname Face in Space and Comet Skull. As the broadcast continues, the comet comes closer, and we are told that it is classified as a PHA, or potentially hazardous asteroid. This is a real classification, by the way, that NASA uses to classify asteroids that come really close to Earth's orbit. So if you need a real dose of real horror, there are currently over 2,300 asteroids classified as PHAs. So fun. As the comet begins to come into view, we start to see why it's called Comet Skull. Its shape starts to reveal itself to us, and we see a horrific artist rendition of the comet that takes a few artistic liberties, if you ask me. But as the comet starts to become closer, the lander starts to shift towards the left, eye of the comet, and a door comes into view. So we progressed from cool to uncanny to horrifying, and now finally, why in the heck is there a door on a comet in space? The lander finally makes a soft landing just to the bottom side of the door, and after a few seconds, the door simply disappears, revealing a web-like biological growth similar to that of the moon in skywatching. The lander is then yeeted off the comet, tumbling through space, and the live stream ends. If you're anything like me, you probably have many questions after watching this. First, landing on a comet hurtling through space seems like total science fiction. But it has actually been done before. 3 times, in fact, especially if you count comets and asteroids together. The first being near Shoemaker that landed on the asteroid Eros in 2001, even though it wasn't designed as a lander. Philae of the European Space Agency on Comet 67P in 2014, and Osiris on the asteroid Bennu in 2020. Osiris was actually able to land, collect a sample, and then return and drop it off to Earth like some type of space DoorDash. Wild. This doesn't really have anything to do with Local 58, but I like space a lot and just wanted to share that with you. There is also another bit of real-world horror that I want to share with you, and one that I think in conjunction with maybe the real, life comet landings inspired this live stream. This is 2015 TB-145, a real asteroid classified as a PHA, and proof that sometimes real life can be stranger than fiction. But with that out of the way, we are now able to move on and start piecing together the timeline of these broadcasts. As previously mentioned with the videos, a look back and digital transition, we are able to fairly accurately identify the rough broadcast order for most of the episodes. Up first is Contingency, which takes place in the 1966 through 1977 era of broadcast, but to be more specific, takes place at the very earliest after 1971 due to the inclusion of a historic photograph of an astronaut during the Apollo 15 mission. In August of 1971. After that, we have Show for Children in the 1977 through 1988 era, and then Skywatching during the 1988 through 2002 era. The following 3 episodes, however, they take place in the 2002 through 2011 era. But let me be clear that this is speculation on my part of what I believe the timeline of events to be, that I'll explain later. But I believe it's real sleep, then weather service, followed by you are on the fastest available route. Now, you may want to call out that there is a discrepancy here because you are on the fastest available route has dashcam footage dated for 2014. And according to Digital Transition, there was a new logo being used here. This would make for an interesting time dilation effect being added to the series, but apparently Chris Straub elaborated on it in a Reddit thread saying that this era used both logos. So, also in a look back, there's no new logo showcased, and it contains a clip from "You Are on the Fastest Available Route." So there you have it. Speaking of a look back, that episode, this one comes next, followed by the episode "Digital Transition," which takes place exactly on July 13th, 2021. And then lastly, we have the live stream Close. There's also station ID left to place, but considering its contents, it doesn't particularly matter where it's placed on the timeline, as it wouldn't affect any theory as far as I can tell. But just know it's during the 2002 through 2011 era. So that's 10 episodes placed on the timeline. But there's actually an 11th video. There's context, but we were getting a little ahead of ourselves. But before we start analyzing each episode frame by frame, let me tell you a real world story that may have influenced Local 58 and shed light on what I think we are dealing with. William Henry Pickering, born in 1858, was a Harvard physics professor who loved observing our solar system at the campus observatory. Anything from selenography, observing the other planets and moons, as well as just chasing solar eclipses, he loved it all. Selenography, for those of you that don't know, is the practice of observing and charting the surface of our own moon. He was even somewhat parallel to the discussion of the hunt for the elusive Planet X. But where Percival Lowell, the astronomer that was actually hunting for Planet X, was only looking for one planet, Pickering was actually looking for 7. Years later, this hunt actually led us to finding Pluto. And though Pickering had a hand in it, the Lowell estate claimed the credit for it. Pickering published a lot of scientific papers and photographs about our solar system, but one thing that he put forward somewhat controversially was the possibility of life on the moon. In his observations around one of the moon craters, he noticed something that would shine, and this shine would kind of wax and wane, so he hypothesized it could be possible for some type of lower vegetation to actually be able to inhabit the moon. Of course, we know that now the moon harbors no vegetation or other forms of life, but at the time it caught the attention of a certain someone who many of you may be familiar with, who called Pickering the greatest selenographer, and wrote a paper concerning Pickering's postulations on the possibility of life on the moon. He concluded this paper by saying, "We must consider our satellite, which to be a body which, although not containing any high or animal life, is yet not wholly dead." That certain someone was H.P. Lovecraft, the father of cosmic horror. I just did all this to say that Local 58's moon is a Lovecraftian nightmare beyond their own understanding. Look, the popular theories for Local 58 are aliens, government hoax, connected Chris Straub universe stuff, or it's a cosmic being beyond our own understanding. I fall into the latter half, so let's get through this analysis so I can explain why. All right, so we're going to go back through the episodes in the order of my proposed timeline and discuss all the hints that I can find that led me to what I believe to be the overarching story of Local 58, starting with contingency. First off, this happens after the U.S. has made at least 4 successful Apollo missions to the moon, due to the inclusion of the historic Apollo 15 photograph, and by now in the series we already know that something weird is going on with the moon. So I believe that they definitely discovered something on these missions, but just to plan a little teaser, whatever they discovered on the moon didn't actually put things into motion for the Local 58 story. That actually occurs decades earlier. But again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The card for contingency gives the impression that the US government has had this pre-recorded for some time, but it seems more like an isolated experiment that's using Local 58 because of the hoax apology card present at the end containing US-DDFPAD-1F WCLV58, WCLV58, that's Local 58. I also believe that this wasn't intended by the government to be released as it was, but rather was a part of a broadcast hijacking and used without government authorization, obviously. The first question is, why would the US want to release something like this in the first place, like to begin with? During the 60s, the U.S. Was in a Cold War with Russia, with tensions peaking around the Cuban Missile Crisis, so there is your precedent for this type of propaganda kind of existing. But the Cold War started to kind of relax its tensions, starting in the 70s. But we all know that the Cold War was about the Russians, but this isn't really about the Russians. But it seems like a wild and crazy experiment to show the population a reel, asking them to, take the greatest liberty of all. Well, the CIA is all about wild and crazy experiments. Have you ever heard of the Bay of Pigs? It was a failed invasion where the CIA trained Cuban refugees to try and take Cuba back through military force and kill Castro, or dethrone Castro. President Eisenhower was the one that greenlit the operation, but it didn't actually happen until JFK had already taken office. He was briefed and he gave the go-ahead to continue, and when it failed, it was a pretty big embarrassment, and it kind of showed the Americans' hands on how they wanted to deal with this threat. The CIA, however, they weren't ready to throw in the towel, and were already devising new methods to take out Castro, including things like poisoned cigars, poisoned ice cream, even a poisoned diving suit, complete with an exploding conch shell. Those were all on the table. They even had this plan of dousing one of his broadcast stations with a chemical that imitated LSD trips. JFK, however, after this failed Bay of Pigs, decided that he was done with the CIA's crazy schemes and wanted to take a more diplomatic approach, which ultimately worked out, and the side effect was that it kind of soured JFK's relationship with the CIA. So there's no way that JFK would have ever given the go-ahead to do an experiment like this of contingency, especially on American citizens. But Lyndon B. Johnson, JFK's vice president, who became president after JFK's assassination, might. Which, if you are unaware, the real world conspiracy is that these, 3-letter agencies like the CIA, FBI, the Mafia, had a hand in JFK's assassination. But that's really just a giant rabbit hole for a whole other separate video. But Johnson is the one who did sign this name, or his name, at the top of the episode Contingency. And the reason for this proposed experiment we'll discuss soon. Just remember the 3 F's discussed in Contingency: front lawn, face up, feet together. All right, show for children. This episode has a few interesting points of speculation. Firstly, it's a really old black and white cartoon. The title card even gives dates to 1929, but that seems really early in this timeline, right? Because this is being broadcast much later. I believe this kind of hints to how early the events of Local 58 were actually set into motion. It's hard to really draw any solid parallels, but there is an early date I will mention very soon that kind of ties back into Show for Children. So the next thing of note are the graves cadaver looks into. The first contains a skeleton, then some beaked larvae creature thing, and then a tunnel leading to a natural underground cavern where cadaver finds another grave where he assumes the position mentioned in Contingency. It's not exactly the 3 F's, there's not a front lawn per se, but it is the same position. The difference is the inclusion of the moon as it passes over him and he dies, which I believe connects the experiment of Contingency reel with whatever is going on with the moon. I think what it's all communicating is some type of ancient ritual that maybe became the basis for a government experiment. I believe the government stumbled onto something that they didn't understand and started a secret project to try and understand it, and maybe make a weapon out of it, like they always want to do. This will make more sense as we get further into this, but so far it seems like maybe the moon requires some type of mass sacrificial ritual for a purpose we will see soon. One more thing before we move on, I want you to keep this cave that Cadaver walks through in mind. All right, so Contingency, Show for Children, and then Skywatching make up what I believe to be the first act of our timeline story. Contingency and Show for Children set up a mystery, possible experimentation, and intrigue for what I believe culminates with the events of Skywatching. So let's start looking at our clues. The mention of a city council meeting recording in 1991 does help at least date the events of Skywatching, but I believe this will probably be more helpful after future releases of Local 58. But for now, I can't find any historical events in 1991 that seem to correlate with the events or ideas or themes of Local 58. The host of the actual Skywatching show, Hank Hinderman, is a name that pops up again, possibly making him an important character, but this involvement, other than producing the real Skywatching show and submitting astronomy photographs during the closed live stream, I'm not really sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw his name pop up again. So really the first thing of note that I want to mention is that the tape that hijacks this show looks like a home movie. This suggests to me that it's, rather than like a it being a government experiment, that it's a rogue group or individual that has intimate knowledge with the situation with the moon. And when he is showing Orion's belt and Pleiades, I mispronounced that earlier, whoops. This isn't just to give the impression that you're actually watching a show about skywatching or constellations, but rather a more direct message. You see, Orion's belt and Pleiades are mentioned 3 separate times in the Christian Bible, twice in the book of Job. Now, I don't want to break down into a Bible study on the book of Job, because this video is already going to be long enough, but it's a pretty tough book to get through. As far as context goes, Job is a righteous man of God, and the adversary, or Satan, starts taking jabs at God and saying that Job is only a good guy because God blessed him with, health, a wife, family, and a lot of land and livestock. The things that basically made you a millionaire in the time period. So Satan says if he takes all those things away, then Job will curse God. God allows this, and Job essentially loses everything. All his livestock and family die, and he is stricken with sickness. There's a lot of back and forth between Job and his friends about why this is happening, and then eventually Job goes directly to God, and he's all like, "Hey God, what gives? God gives him the cosmic answer of, I'm God because XYZ and you're not. So I don't expect you to understand all that I do, but I need you to have faith. So Job says, okay. And then he regains all his health, his livestock, and a new family. This is really a gross simplification of the book of Job, but the part of the power of God moment in the book of Job that relates to what I'm trying to say about Pleiades and Orion's belt is in Job 38:31. It reads, can you bind the chains of Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Job 38, this whole chapter is just a chapter of cosmic things that only God can do or know. So the answer to that for Job is obviously no. He can't do any of that. He's just a man. He can't control the cosmos. So to finally kind of bring this back to Local 58, when the cameraman focuses on Pleiades and Orion's belt, it's as if he is saying that, what can you do before a god? Absolutely nothing. Pleiades and Orion's belt have Greek mythology lore as well, but I just want to keep that in mind as we move forward. The next big point is about how the broadcast titles the moon as his throne. This to me implies that this is not the moon itself that's the cosmic being, but that it's possibly a great source of power or a tool or a weapon. Not all his power, as I'm going to get into some of that, other stuff, with the cosmic being and what it can do with the moon. But think of maybe the moon like the golden throne from Warhammer. When Big Imps is sitting on this thing, it amplifies his psychic power, a millionfold. But he was still a powerful psychic being without it. I think the same thing applies here. Also, the golden throne requires 1,000 sacrifices a day for the thing to even work. And I believe that ritual sacrifice is involved with the moon entity as well. So, okay, next point. Why does the moon have all this organic web-like growth? I think this sent a lot of people in the direction that the moon itself was the cosmic entity, but I think it's just meant to be weird and shocking. If we're dealing with something outside our own understanding, then what's to say that a throne of flesh is out of the question, really? I mean, just think about any of like H.H. Geiger's landscapes or that video game Scorn. I think you will get my point. And remember, we saw this same web-like organic growth on the inside of the door on the Comet Eidolon in the live stream. The one thing that I can't really make heads or tails of is the lunar base, which is kind of a big deal, and that triangle structure. The base has a few characteristics that gives me the impression that it's ancient. And it also makes me think it resembles a constellation pattern, but it's not one that I recognize, nor have I really been able to find one. The triangle or the pyramid portion almost looks like it's kind of cut into the moon itself. It's like there's a missing piece of the puzzle there. My only theory really evolving this is that maybe it's an ancient moon temple and that maybe there's a piece of the structure missing and possibly floating around in space. Or, it could also possibly just be an homage to, sacred geometry via, Pythagorean theorem. I don't know. Either way, I don't really have any solid conclusions yet. Then, of course, there's the big reveal of sky watching where the moon becomes super big and super bright and reveals a giant-looking dead god thing in the moon. There are 2 points I would like to make here. Point 1, the moon actually does get really big and really bright during a lunar phenomenon called a supermoon, and it looks bigger and brighter because its orbit is closer than it usually is throughout the year. These occur every year for 3 to 4 days, and it's consecutive. I bring this up because I believe that these celestial events are partly required for things like the events of skywatching and weather service. Point 2 is that this thing in the moon doesn't look anything remotely like the creature from a show for children. Look at them. The eye sockets don't match up, and there isn't a bink. Wendigoon tried to make this comparison in his video, and I think he only did this because if they aren't the same, then, what in the absolute blue hell is that creature in the grave? Well, I think it's just another, eldritch creature, but I have a theory about what it is, and we'll get into that a bit later. One last bit. I want to emphasize the broadcast use of the word rejoice. This implies a fun little addition to the series, and that would be that we got ourselves a moon cult, baby! So remember how I was talking about how the US government learned something maybe as far back as the 1920s. Well, we are now 3 to 4 generations removed from whatever they found back then, and in that time, a lot of stuff can happen. Like if they found a body of a dead god and it started speaking into their minds, telling them a bunch of sweet nothings like, if you obey me and worship me, I will bestow riches untold and knowledge to you. So somewhere along the timeline, some people danced with some forbidden knowledge and lost their minds to whatever this eldritch entity we are dealing with, which I think is just super neat, like a super moon. All right, it's time to dig into Real Sleep, that episode, and there are a lot of goodies to pull from this one. First, let's start with who the tape is personalized for, Philip Gerhardt. So this name really didn't mean much until the live stream of Close, where we get an amateur photograph of Eidolon from someone by the name of Angela Gerhardt. Not the same person, obviously, but the same surname, which implies they are family in some fashion, whether that's siblings, marriage, or extended family. By Angela observing Eidolon, I take it that she knows more about the face in space than your common person, and by proxy, so did Philip. It's just unclear to what role that ultimately is, but I believe they might be trying to bring to light some of the events surrounding the moon phenomenon. The next point is, who is the Thought Research Institute? Well, I believe the TRI are a branch of our moon cult. The language of the video is just unhinged, with statements like precognition is a lie and do not see a doctor, not particularly something you would see from a well-regarded scientific institute. Also, the part about precognition being a lie seems awfully specific, and we will see some more interesting stuff about thoughts and manifestation soon. The big theme of this video, though, seems to be trying to induce some sort of prosopagnosia, or face blindness, by using psychological trickery by melding distorted faces together and repeating the mantra, there are no faces. But there is absolutely a big face in space that we know about in the form of the comet Eidolon that Philip, by this point, might already know about, because we know that Angela for sure has knowledge on it later in the timeline. But let's get on to the next clue from sequence 4 of the video. This part, as you watch the video for the first time, won't mean much as it goes by so fast, but subliminally, you can pick up a lot that just kind of buries itself in the back of your mind. This effect works in real life, just like how it might work for Philip. If he watched this video, he could stitch it all together and digest it. And when we take it all and put it out in front, there's some interesting things we can kind of find. First off, these messages can kind of be broken up into 5 categories. Esoteric statements, statements pertaining to sleep, faces, statements directed towards Philip directly, and affirmations about the messenger, which I believe is the moon entity. Let's get the faces part out of the way. It states the aforementioned there are no faces, they are not faces. So this implies to me that there's more to be concerned about than just the comet Eidolon. So you have there are no faces, they are not faces, plural. The statements about sleep say things like, the lie of sleep seeks many vessels. When we sleep, we die. We are not meant to dream. The whole point of this video, on the surface anyways, is to improve sleep by nullifying a person's ability to dream. So something about the ability to dream is a threat, I believe, to our eldritch moon baddie. Let's move on. Our esoteric statements, including cognition is a lie, logic is the final burden, and the subconscious is a parasite. This really reads to me like, hey, unburden yourself of your own will and just accept the will of something greater than you. The next statements regarding Philip are really interesting, though. This is your time now. Stay out of your bedroom. There is work to be done, and you owe the messenger. That last one, you owe the messenger. That's really sinister. This makes me believe that whatever Philip was involved with must have been important, that the moon cult and its overlord really want to subjugate him really bad. The affirmations about the messenger are also really interesting, but again, somewhat esoteric. I dream the world awake. I will never dream again. We are our own gods. I am an idea thinking itself. I think this is just meant to give us the impression of a cosmic being or possibly the ramblings of a cultist, because on its own, none of this makes any sense. But neither does the moon being a Geiger-esque fleshy landscape, so, Also, we are our own gods. I don't believe is meant to include the cult or Philip, but other beings like the moon or Eidolon, because there is one more statement I left out. They follow night to bleed dreams. Who are they? I haven't a clue, but it implies there are more forces at work than just one entity or even two. The last part I want to bring up about the episode is a detail regarding Nathaniel Kleitman, the person responsible for the Kleitman map earlier in the episode. Now, Nathaniel Kleitman, like I said, is the father of sleep research in real life, and he and his cohorts they discovered REM sleep, essentially. He did this research because he was kind of interested in solving the human consciousness idea, and he thought he could find the secrets to it in sleep. So they, of course, did a bunch of experiments regarding sleep, but for one study, they wanted to see how malleable a person's circadian rhythm was. For this, they needed an environment that was consistently dark with the same ambient temperature so they could remove as many variables as possible.
An alarm clock calls time on a unique experiment. Two Chicago University experts, who in the service of science have been living in the depths of Mother Earth for more than a month, end their test. Bruce Richardson on the bunk and Dr. Nathaniel Kleitman have been studying the cycle of sleep to see if man without daylight can abandon the 7-day week. The recorder indicates Richardson sleeps and wakes regardless of the 24-hour period, while Dr. Kleitman is bound by previous habits, not being as adjustable as his younger companions. Dr. Kleitman speaks.
Mr. Richardson and I have now been in Mammoth Cave a little over 4 weeks. We have come here to make observations on the physiology of sleep, a part of his study that has been going on at the University of Chicago since 1922. We were entirely successful in our undertaking. We wanted known that it is in no way a stunt or an act of endurance or perseverance, but a bona fide scientific experiment. We hope that the results which we obtained will be of benefit to science.
They hosted these experiments in 1938 underground in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, which is the largest known cave system in the world. And remember, who else found his way into an underground cave? Cadaver. And you know what else started in 1938? Local 58. Dr. Kleitman started his research in the 20s, but I think something was coming to them in their dreams, and that led them underground to someplace that fully manifested in their dreams there and started the events of Local 58. I mean, that's a lot, but we're not finished yet. We still have to continue Philip's story. All right, so Weather Service is a bit more straightforward in terms of clues. Let's start at the broadcast lineup. Public Eye, we saw a snippet of an episode from A Look Back, and we did see a mention of a city council meeting in Skywatching. Maybe this city council meeting is more of a cult gathering, or possibly it's a gathering of our anti-moon group. More on that in just a sec. It's hard to say at this point, but it is notable that something pertaining to a city council is found in the broadcast lineup before both lunar events. The last time slot is Focus on Faith. I believe this to be a fun reference to our moon cult. But as the broadcast continues, there is something interesting that is going on in the background. It's like two separate people are fighting for control over the broadcast. So this implies that there is a pro-moon people, or our moon cultists, as I like to refer to them, and anti-moon people. As it goes, we can kind of clearly see the time where our fighter loses and submits their control over to the lunar entity. So this is the first real instance of the moon's powers being shown, the power of instantaneous brainwashing. So you can see the change instantly as they describe how the moon got to them. They just caught the moonlight through the mirror. This is helpful because it allows us to understand the full scope of whatever the moon's abilities are. This power comes directly from observing moonlight. whether that's directly looking at the moon through a window or through a mirror. What remains uncertain, though, is if it maintains this powers if you watch it through a broadcast, as any broadcast wouldn't be the moon's actual light, but a reproduction of it. Another clue is the description of what the light is. As the broadcaster says, it isn't blood, or it isn't light but blood. Just a little earlier in the broadcast, the lineup was just being changed to one event that was blood of the, before the broadcast was interrupted again. This will be useful because we will see mentions of blood again soon. Alright, you are on the fastest available route. On the surface, doesn't seem to hold a lot of clues, but there are some correlations I want to point out, as well as ask the question of who is our driver. So the GPS takes our driver to a remote place and oddly asks them to turn it off. We already know this. Any normal person would just think something's wrong with their GPS, but our driver actually complies and turns them off. The only reason I can think of is that they knew they were heading somewhere weird and just went along with it. But when they heard the roar, they instantly knew something was wrong and they tried to book it out of there. I believe our driver is Philip Gerhardt. So if we go back to Real Sleep, remember I postulated that airing the tape could be seen as a threat if Philip was a part of our anti-moon group. Well, if they couldn't convince him or find him, then the last option would be just remove him from the equation entirely. And it looks like maybe they tricked him or lured him to a remote location to be taken out by this monster. Speaking of our monster, I believe this is the same creature from the second grave in the episode Show for Children, but in a more mature stage. The beak is really kind of the big identifying factor for me, but the real question is, what is it? I believe this is an Oniros. It's a creature from Greek mythology, but I'm going to need to go to the next episode in our analysis to kind of explain why I think that. We send signals to ourselves through their domain. Did we really believe they wouldn't add their own? Obviously, the signals are the radio broadcast used for TV, radio, and communication, and we see several clips that are used from earlier episodes of hijacked broadcasts. This kind of implies that these whole broadcasts were concocted by our lunar god entity, but I actually think that most of it was through our moon cult, which could be divinely inspired by the moon cult entity. Still kind of the same end results, but it feels more natural to me this way. Their domain, I believe, signifies, space, because we already have a weird moon and comet thing in the series, and who's to say we might not be dealing with other astral objects in later episodes. The series of clips that we get afterwards includes clips from earlier episodes, as well as things we haven't seen yet from shows like Public Eye and Still Life. The paintings shown in the clip for Still Life are worth talking about, though. The first is titled Saturn Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya. Fun bit about this painting, Goya mostly painted for the royal court, and that's how he kind of gained his fame, but he became deaf from some disease and later just became a recluse. This painting, Saturn Devouring His Son, is just one of 14 paintings that he painted directly on the walls of his home, where he had no intentions of ever letting them be seen. And they're almost all just as dark as Saturn Devouring His Son. He wrote no notes and told no one. These 14 paintings were removed from the walls 50 years after his death and restored, and this collection of paintings are known as the Black Paintings, which is one of the most metal things I have ever heard in my life. I'm not really like an art person per se, but I do enjoy some art in my own way, and a lot of the black paintings I find incredibly intriguing. Don't be surprised if I do a video about it someday. But Saturn is the Roman name for Kronos, the Greek titan, Zeus's dad. The story, of course, is that Kronos took power, and his mother Gaius, who was literally just the earth, gave him a prophecy that one day one of his own children would overthrow him. Well, Cronus, or Saturn, decided that he didn't like that idea so much, so he decided to eat all his kids as they were born. Well, his wife, Rhea, his sister Titan, decided that she didn't like this system all too much and decided to trick him by giving him a stone or a rock instead of the baby. Well, this particular child was Zeus, and he eventually overcame his father and became the new big boss, so to speak. The next painting is Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan by Ilya Repin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Russian names are tough. This painting has some controversy, but we'll skip it to get to the point with these two paintings. They both depict filicide, or, parents killing their kids. Now, they aren't quite the same, as Saturn devouring his son looks to be a picture of madness, while Ivan the Terrible and his son looks to be kind of a picture of grief. Though I guess the idea is that Ivan killed his son Ivan, so it's madness. It could be both. I think this is really kind of a clue to the greater story, though, of what's going on with Local 58. And this isn't the first instance of Greek mythology either. Pleiades and Orion are steeped in Greek mythology, and Eidolon, the name of our comet, is a Greek word that translates to phantom. It has occurred enough for me to believe that maybe the ancient story of our moon entity might already be chronicled in Greek mythology, or partially maybe. Which brings me back to our beaked monster friend, whom I believe to be Oniros. Oniros are a part of Greek mythology and are considered to be these dark-winged daemons or spirits, or personification of dreams. Up to this point, we've had several nods to Greek mythology as well as dreams. This is all speculation, of course, but I think it fits. They also come from a land of eternal darkness, and I'm pretty sure the cave imagery from the episode Show for Children kind of gives us a clue from where they came from. Eternal darkness. They're also servants of the gods, and well, I'm pretty sure it was serving our moon god by taking out Philip in the episode You're on the Fastest Available Route. Oh, and one last thing before we head on from this episode. But the last painting featured in the episode is Still Life with Skull and Writing Quill. Not the most exciting title, but it belonged to a period in time where these still life paintings with skulls were very common. They were called vanitas, or vanitas, I'm not really sure, but they were heavily inspired by the idea of memento mori, or Latin for remember you must die. And they emphasized the shortness of life and its futility. This isn't some grand clue, like some of the other details, but it reads like a continuation of the Pleiades and Orion's Belt constellation subtext. What are humans' transient lives to an eternal cosmic being? I think it's just a nice touch, and one of the reasons why I like this series. All right. We're on to the last video in the analysis, the episode Digital Transition, and then it's on to the close live stream, and then the ARG world. I might actually swap those, but we're bringing it into the home stretch. So the first thing I want to bring up is the retrospective section of this video, where it's kind of rolling through the decades of Local 58. In one section, there is a news clip of a mining disaster. This is what hooked me into the idea that they found something underground. We have seen it referenced twice now, the other being in the episode Show for Children, and the fact that Nathaniel Kleitman, the scientist referenced in the episode Real Sleep, performed a very famous experiment underground. I think this cements this theory pretty hard, honestly. It's difficult to say what exactly happened, but considering it's labeled as a mining disaster, whatever it had to be was probably a pretty big deal, and had to be covered up. I don't think we'll actually get more information on this in other episodes, though. I think it's really just here to kind of give us the right headspace for the story and kind of what's transpiring. Anyways, moving on from that, the big dramatic part is coming up. So when the broadcast transitions finally happens, we get the return of our moon god entity, and he's not too happy. So the word that's used in the header at one point is betrayal. I think this indicates that this is what was possibly unexpected for our, the moon folks, the moon entity. The word choice for the monologue, while sounding super cool and esoteric, also has an interesting kind of subtext to it that I read. The use of knives and needles almost makes it sound like some type of autopsy or experiment with some type of redistribution of parts or power, maybe. Now, who is actually doing that between the moon cult or the government is really hard to say. This esoteric monologue is just definitely from the moon entity, though. I, the always here, I come through the window, being used kind of makes it very clear. The next part is definitely our moon cult, though, as they are the thousand mouths. Also, there are other receivers is being mentioned, and it will be mentioned many, many more times and already has been mentioned, so remember that. Instead of going straight to the close live stream, I'm going to divert and dig a little into the ARG now. I decided to swap them up as it'll actually set up some of the stuff for the live stream. And it came out before it too. But most of all the ARG elements were released prior to the episode digital transition and then in the months following. The first thing we should look at is this image titled The Era of Home Recording. Most everything here reads kind of like a value proposition for early tape devices, telling you everything it can do, like record programs or make home movies, but the very end has a fun esoteric Easter egg. Before the gilded doorsill of our master's silent house, we lift our mortal eyes along its wide forgotten stair and fix them thereupon an empty throne. So this sounds like the moon cult talking about the moon based on the reference to it being a throne. But what's interesting is it says that it's empty. So this is where I get the idea that our moon entity didn't transcend up to the moon until the events of skywatching through some sort of ritual, possibly connected to the 3Fs. The last part to this picture is there is a QR code hidden down in this TV at the bottom right-hand corner, which after you scan gives you the following text. Let's see, a predator cannot differentiate prey from accomplice. I believe this is just signifying that the moon entity can't tell the difference from its own cultist and just a regular person. The next image that we should look at is for what is called a vestigial low band filter. This doesn't have any fun esoteric Easter eggs in the script like the other one, but it sounds like this might be what our cultists are manipulating so they can hijack the broadcast. The language used throughout is very firm that nothing should be tampered with and that repair and maintenance is always covered. There is also another QR code as well that reveals the text parasite is to host as inhabitant is to environment. I actually kind of struggled with this one and what it could ultimately mean, but I think that it could either be implying that humans are a parasite or that maybe the moon entity is a parasite on the moon. I can read it both ways. The next set of clues is listed on a 404 page, like a 4-page not found, that actually had some Easter eggs listed throughout. Let's see, not blood, what you need is no longer there, and past a certain point, and past a certain point, watching is no different from doing. The only reference we have to blood is for the moonlight, so not blood. I think maybe that what you see is no longer there might be referencing whatever was being searched for underground, since both our moon entity possibly and our beaked monster came from there, and are already out in the world at this point. Beyond a certain point, watching is no different than doing sounds kind of like a call to action for someone, but it's hard to say for who. Maybe this was Philip trying to get people involved at some point in time. But after this point, the episode digital transition went live and we got the phone number we could call or text. The call actually contains Morse code that says there are other receivers, and texting it reveals the same thing. So this has appeared over and over again, and I think what it means is twofold. One, I think it means that they have other means of manipulating technology, kind of like the GPS in the episode You Are on the Fastest Route. And two, I think it means that there are other things out in space receiving our broadcast. Because after we get the close live stream and we see that there is something weird going on with the Comet Island, what else is there? The very last thing in the ARG that I find pertinent was a hidden link to the unlisted video in SA-3, which I shown earlier as the 11th video. While it's a cool find, it's really hard to say what kind of clues can be gathered from it. It's obviously very creepy, But there is the creepy face in it, and after this video, we did get the close live stream with the face in space. As far as I've been able to tell, though, there's not really any other discernible clues, and I don't think anyone has found anything else. But it is a cool addition, especially for an ARG. We are finally at the end of the analysis before we put all of this together. But we've already touched on a lot of the elements to the close live stream, but there's one more thing that I want to discuss. In the live stream, we get a few shots of Eidolon, including aphelion and perihelion. These are measured in AU, or astronomical units, where 1 AU is roughly 93 million miles or 150 kilometers, which is the average distance from the sun to the Earth, or the Earth to the sun. Eidolon has a perihelion of 1 AU, which gives it the classification of a potentially hazardous asteroid. I think it's possible that in future episodes, this thing might actually hit either the Earth or possibly even the moon, which, considering the biological looking growth that's in it, probably wouldn't be a good thing. Okay, so that was a giant info dump, and now it's finally time to kind of condense all of this into what I believe to be the story of Local 58 so far. Nathaniel Kleitman in the 1920s began his research of human sleep to delve into the mysteries of human consciousness, where he discovered some interesting things, especially during REM sleep, that eventually led him to pursue his research underground, where I believe he made contact with our moon entity through dreams. During this research, I also believe other entities began to reach out using dreams as well, creating our conflict between, groups of researchers and others that would eventually become our moon cult. These events influenced what would become the contingency video that would serve as an experiment and show for children that serves more as a warning. Decades pass, and through some form of ritual or experiment, the moon entity is restored to his throne, like in Skywatching. The conflict isn't over, though, as others such as Philip Gerhardt seek to oppose this and find ways to counteract the brainwashing effects of the moon. But the moon cult is aware of this and tries to find ways to reach Philip and bring him over to their side. But after they fail, they resort to unleashing the Oniros monster on him to either snuff him out completely or possibly kidnapping. His fate, we still don't know. As this happens, events beyond our planet are beginning to come to a head, where other receivers or heavenly bodies have taken notice and are making their move towards Earth. All the while, this battleground for awareness and propaganda is being fought over the airways of our humble local broadcast station, Local 58. And this brings us to the story so far. So, I've already mentioned that I think I have an inkling for what comes next. And we've already talked about some of these correlations with Greek mythology that's been at play. Also, this is wild speculation, and I'm just doing this part for fun, but what if our moon entity possibly is Zeus? A part of the mythology is that at one point Zeus was to be dethroned. He even had an heir. This in mythology never happened, though. There was like one attempt by Hera, but it ended up failing. What if these events that were prophesied to happen in Greek myth are happening now, and our comet Eidolon is our new successor? Something to think about. Or I'm crazy. I'm probably crazy. Whew. And there you have it. The story of Local 58, the progenitor of modern analog horror and one of the best. Now, all that's left is to try and get this video edited before the end of October, and because I have a feeling that October 31st, we might be getting a new entry to the series called The Woman in Profile. that has been teased by Chris Straub somewhere, I think on a Reddit thread. Also, I think his Instagram posted a picture of something that looks interesting, so I've got to get to work. I also had no intentions for this video to really like end up being this long, but sometimes, you know, the rabbit hole takes you to all sorts of places that you might not expect. Hopefully with the next entry in the series, you know, I might be proved right in some respects, but probably not. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. I'm excited though. I want to make a special thanks to the people at the Game Detectives Wiki for consolidating all the ARG elements, as well as the fan wiki for chronicling a lot of this information in a written format with photos of the episodes. There's so much that happens throughout the series that having these resources really like made it much easier to parse through the information. So thank you. If you made it this far in the video, I would also like to thank you as well for watching. I know already that this is going to be a long one, and I appreciate your attention very much. If you thought it was interesting, or that I brought up some interesting points that you maybe weren't aware of, I would appreciate it very much if you would give the video a like or comment, or possibly both, if you're so inclined and generous. If you feel like this was all a bunch of dog water and I'm a total fool, please comment what your theories might be. I absolutely am not dead set on any of this, and, you know, would appreciate if anybody would point something out, because I honestly would just really like to know as well. Also, feel free to share this video, because it would be really cool if Chris Straub was to find this and tell me how insane I actually sound. But if you are still feeling generous, then subscribe as well. I only have 2 other videos posted so far, but feel free to check those out. I intend to just pursue things and make videos about stuff that I find interesting, which includes, you know, the macabre, weird history, cults, mystery, intrigue, and horror, and stuff like analog horror. I like it. So if that interests you, please feel free to join me on this journey. But that's all from me. Ciao for now.